International nurse migration is the movement of nurses from one country to another for the purpose of economic, personal, and professional reasons. In 2019, there were an estimated 37,370 international educated nurses, or IENs, in Canada. Of the 37,370, approximately 28,306 of them were registered nurses, or RNs. The number of international migrants is expected to increase in the following years due to global mobility, population growth, and climate change. International nurse migration is linked to globalization by the increased need and demand for nurses globally. Nurses are the preferred healthcare workers among migrants due to their global demand and skills. Most developed countries have turned to immigration countries in order to fulfill their population needs. Often, nurses are sought out by foreign countries in order to fill in the gap and lack of nurses needed to provide healthcare. However, the mass migration of nurses from the origin country to the host country has caused a shortage in the country of origin, which has contributed to emerging health crises in certain countries. We have chosen to speak about the three main ways in which international nurse migration influences globalization. In terms of shifting in perspective of nursing was previously seen in a negative light. Nurses were seen as sexually promiscuous, wicked, and poor. They were also labeled as doctors' servants. However, due to international nurse migration, the perspective shifted to nursing being seen as favorable, admirable, and encouraging for young people to pursue. In terms of brain drain is a concept in which the host countries who accept IENs must integrate them into their healthcare systems, while on the other hand, the countries of origin who transfer their nurses must deal with the depleting workforce. Brain drain essentially refers to the difficulties in which the countries face to integrate and recuperate for the loss of professionals. Lastly, in terms of culture of exile, the culture of exile was brought about when the youth of the origin country developed a mindset that in order to escape the poverty of the host country, and in order to excel financially, they must seek abodes in developed economies such as North America and Europe. It was because of this popular mindset and increased rates of migration brought about the term culture of exile.
Looking at a positive implication of international nurse migrations on global health for source countries where nurses migrate from, the concept of brain circulation leads to the introduction of new knowledge and skills into their nursing practice. In the event that nurses return to their home nations, they bring with them enhanced skills and new ideas gained from their experiences abroad. In developing countries specifically, the experiences gained by nurses who migrate to more developed nations may build the self-confidence of their home healthcare practice. In addition, nurses who return to their home nation can mentor other nurses by teaching new skills, thus increasing overall competence of nursing teams and the quality of care they provide. Experiences gained abroad can motivate nurses who return home to advocate for better infrastructure, better working conditions, and improved nursing curriculums that reflect current evidence-based practice techniques. Another benefit here of brain circulation is that nursing shortages caused by brain drain in the source country are remedied by returning nurses. The second benefit of international nurse migrations on the global health of source countries is the formation of new beneficial alliances with other countries. Nurses who migrate abroad can act as liaisons or representatives to partner with other nurses and healthcare professionals abroad on new projects and health initiatives. Such collaborations with developed countries could enable nurses in less developed countries to have access to new knowledge, new skills, new technology and ideas so that they can foster continuing competence in their practice. Other arrangements such as transfer nursing programs and subsidized education systems could be made through these alliances as well. Looking at what recipient countries stand to gain from international nurse migrations, there is the creation of a multicultural nursing workforce within their healthcare teams. With the rising diversification of world populations, it is imperative that nurses reflect and respond to an increasingly heterogeneous patient base as well as their unique needs. Knowing how to care for patients with different values, health beliefs, and alternative perspectives is a prerequisite for the provision of culturally competent care because a diverse range of knowledge, skills, and abilities are applied towards maximizing overall patient health outcomes.
There are also negative implications of international nurse migration for global health that need to be considered. While international nurse migration can be a source of nurses for countries experiencing nursing shortages, Paradoxically, nurses who migrate to practice abroad are oftentimes leaving a country or area that is experiencing a shortage of nurses. One negative implication of international nurse migration for global health is the depletion of healthcare professionals from the source country. Although these developing nations are experiencing a shortage of nurses, there is a lack of job opportunities for new nurses that can be attributed to an insufficiency of resources to support expansion of the healthcare workforce. The developing nations that produce nurses for export are incentivized by the revenue that nurse migration generates. Migrant nurses send money back to their home countries, which is termed remittance. The potential international returns on the export of nurses makes it less desirable for countries such as India and the Philippines to focus excessively on domestic nurse retention strategies at the expense of skilled labor export. As a result, nurses that remain in source countries have increased workloads, and the healthcare systems in these countries are not able to adequately support the health needs of the population. Another negative implication of international nurse migration on global health has to do with the challenges migrant nurses are faced with in the destination country. When working abroad, migrant nurses are faced with challenges including communication barriers, difficulty orienting, discrimination and marginalization, lack of opportunities for personal and professional development, lack of support, and cultural differences. Migrant nurses may experience unequal treatment in the workplace and may have lower overall job satisfaction due to lack of professional opportunity to grow. Marginalization in the workplace can create tense work environments and foster poor communication between domestic and migrant nurses, especially when language barriers are also an issue. These dramatic shifts in the lives of migrant nurses without adequate support to transition to working in a foreign country can be a great source of stress for these nurses. This can ultimately have negative consequences on quality of care, client safety, and client outcomes.
There are many implications for global health equity and inequity. One is due to brain drain, where nurses and other healthcare workers are resigning or migrating out of fear of occupational transmission within poor infrastructures or forced to leave. This causes a negative loop that creates greater incentives to migrate while the public health continues to deteriorate. The loss of skilled nurses reinforces their central role to society of delivering care when global pandemics arrive, such as the HIV pandemic. The development of brain waste occurs as well, as nurses become unemployed, underemployed, or employed outside the healthcare setting and or below their skill level. Next, we have the undersupply of human resources for health due to understaffing of hospitals, which will cause the standard of care to decline, as well as the morale among remaining nurses to deteriorate, thus making the viability of healthcare systems in developing countries increasingly threatened. Another implication is in regards to export programs, which designing and enlarging medical and nursing education systems with the ultimate goal of graduates being able to be employed abroad. One example is China, who has a surplus of nurses due to the underinvestment in their healthcare system, leading to a lack of budgeted positions for graduates. As well, the Philippines, which is known for taking advantage of the global nurse demand, has training standards that are inconsistent, and their local board exam pass rates are decreasing with the rapid increase in nursing schools. Their training emphasis can shift from nursing theory and practice to language training or global health trends, which are not found at home. An example would be some schools would employ foreign nationals to teach in a market-friendly language such as English or focus on Western diseases like heart disease, rather than those that have high rates of mortality or morbidity occurring locally. In countries like the Philippines and Bangladesh, nursing graduates work for little or no pay in their home countries so that they can gain the experience to qualify for jobs overseas. This makes it very difficult to pay back student loans and or save for migration, adding to the chronic mass unemployment due to overproduction of local needs.
Global health inequity is work and salary disparities. Because of language barrier, fear of retaliation, and racial discrimination, many newly arrived nurses are subjected to hazardous work conditions, forced overtime, and unsafe labor practices. They are also more likely appointed to less paid nursing roles and unfavorable shift patterns, regardless of their previous experiences and qualifications. Nurses originating from developed nations, such as the US, the UK, or Australia, were paid higher salaries than nurses who migrated from the Philippines, China, or India. Gender-based inequity for women is double burden as experienced between family and money. This discourse occurs when women's gender and professional identities become intertwined with their professions of caring. For men, male nurses in India are being diverted away from nursing jobs because nursing is perceived as solely for women. So, what are the implications for global health equity? Improved socioeconomic status. Remittances are money transfers from overseas workers to their home country and remains a part of international nurse migration to improve socioeconomic status. Through working in developed nations, financial capacity improves to provide the basic necessities, access to health care, and education services for nurses' families. Furthermore, remittances from nurse migrants also help boost their home country's economy. As much as 10% is accounted for the gross domestic product, which would in turn help drive social services. Women empowerment. Migrant nurses gain independence from maternal and matrimonial obligations. For example, Polish women use nursing as a way to escape conservative policies and social values in relation to gender roles. Migrant nurses as breadwinners of their families. They take pride and have some sense of fulfillment for being responsible providers to feed their families at home.
It is evident by now that nurses' migration is an issue that creates inequality and decreases accessibility to healthcare providers in developing countries, while building the healthcare system of already developed countries. To help decrease the impacts of these issues, there are some policies that can be implemented which can provide nurses and healthcare providers the autonomy and freedom to travel, obtain experience, and seek new opportunities while preventing the downfall of the healthcare system of developing countries.
The first policy that can be implemented is encouraging temporary stays and preventing permanent immigration to foreign countries. The longer immigrant workers reside in another country, the less likely they are to return back to their country of origin, because they will have the opportunity to obtain a new career, new advancements, new life, and new benefits from their career. Hence, these occasions become an incentive for the healthcare workers and decrease their willingness to return home. By encouraging the return of immigrant workers after they have obtained their experience, helped out the country, and explored their career opportunities, it can aid in reducing the negative effects of developing countries from being deprived of healthcare workers. The second policy that can be implemented is creating and enforcing a work visa, where many immigrant workers are required to return to their country of origin after working in another country for a given number of days. The policy can help prevent permanent immigration of healthcare professionals. It has been discovered that the quantity of registered nurses is growing. However, there is still inadequate supply of nurses in many countries, which impact their healthcare system. One of the reasons for this is the permanent immigration of healthcare professionals to developed countries. Hence, it is significant to implement policies like this to help keep healthcare professionals within the developing countries and prevent further deterioration of the country. The third policy that can be implemented includes the development of funding that can be created for healthcare workers by increasing taxes or creating a policy that enforces employers to have a specific minimum pay for healthcare workers. It has been determined that the world already has a shortage of approximately 4.3 million healthcare workers, and with the unavailability of these healthcare professionals, the quality and sustainability of healthcare systems are threatened around the world, especially the developing countries. With the undersupply of healthcare workers, the issue becomes synchronized with globalization and results in healthcare workers traveling to high-income countries for better pay. This leaves original low-income countries more deprived of healthcare workers. Hence, this policy will ensure that the healthcare workers are provided the opportunities to obtain proper pay and employment in their country of origin and prevent the urge to migrate to another country for better job security. This prevents the worsening of healthcare systems in the developing countries.
The caregiver program prevents migrant nurses from bringing family members to Canada and increases financial burden on employers who must be responsible for paying all caregiver fees. Financial burden on the employer without guarantee the nurse will be working long-term can predispose nurses to poor working environments and deductions of social and health services. Thereby, the caregiver program should collaborate with immigration policy to encourage family support. The program should implement educational policy to encourage skills training, and human health resource policy is important to address health equity, as well as safety and security among foreign nurses recruited through the caregiver program. The fifth policy that can be implemented are bilateral agreements. Foreign trained nurses must take vocational courses, which increase de-skilling, financial burden, and do not guarantee permanent residency for nurses with temporary work permits. A possible policy response can be the implementation of intergovernmental bilateral agreements, like addressing education and skills training of migrant nurses to recognize and enhance RN credentials, thereby promoting brain circulation by meeting distinct healthcare needs within the source country and advancing the nursing profession within home countries. Another multilateral agreement includes the General Agreement for Trade in Services in relation to Mode 4, described as presence of natural persons. This involves traveling to a foreign country to provide a temporary and specific service as a self-employed person or an employee of a firm. Through Mode 4, migrant nurses meet the labor demands of host countries, although they're increasingly subject to unequal treatment such as workplace harassment, social exclusion, and discrimination by local workers. Protection of worker rights are not part of GATS because members of the World Trade Organization cannot address health inequities of foreign workers, like working excessive hours and deductions to social and health services. Thereby, international policies implementing labor standard protocols in combination with the GATS agreement can reduce exploitation of migrant nurses.
The nursing profession plays an important role in advocating for the issue of international nurse migration that has an impact on global health. One of the ways in which the nursing profession could respond to improving the issue is by advocating for the self-sufficiency of the nursing workforce in low-income countries. Many nurses migrate to developed countries to expand their economic opportunities. As a developed country, Canadian nurses should promote global health by supporting the expansion of healthcare in developing nations and the retention of essential healthcare providers, such as nurses. Nurses can join Nursing Now, a global campaign run in collaboration with the International Council of Nurses and the World Health Organization. Through this campaign, nurses can internationally collaborate to strengthen nursing and promote recognition of the profession. The recruitment of international nurses is another issue that the nursing profession can respond to. If individual nurses in developing countries choose to migrate to a developed country, then that is their right. However, given the shortage of nurses, especially during the pandemic, a solution in addressing the problem is to recruit international nurses. As recommended by the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, it is important to ensure that funding from the government or healthcare organizations funded by the government are not utilized in active or passive recruitment of international nurses. The recruitment of international nurses would largely affect the healthcare system in developing nations. Instead, the nursing profession should lobby for investments in nursing education to produce more nurses locally. Another important factor in improving the issue is advocating for the equal privileges to non-migrant and migrant nurses with the aim of alleviating the discrimination that migrant nurses face in the workplace. Migrant nurses experience various barriers in assimilating into their workplace due to cultural differences and language difficulties. They face discrimination such as only being limited to entry-level positions and not being able to move up the ladder in their career. Individual nurses can advocate for the implementation of policies that promote equal opportunities for both the migrant and non-migrant nurses and improve the inclusion of migrant nurses in the workplace.
Nurses need to use their skills of advocacy to also help other nurses around the world to have better wages, rights, and work conditions. For example, in India, many nurses have poor wages, very bad working conditions where they have to deal with sexism, and those work conditions predispose them to lots of negative health effects, which is very unfair. So us nurses need to urge presidents and prime ministers around the world to take responsibility and power over the rights of other nurses to have better wages, rights, and work conditions. Nurses should also hold a lot of social events to allow for opportunities of change. Iran actually does this where they invite a lot of parties who are in power, like government officials, health ministries, where people can get together and talk about ideas and implement change. And this is a very strategic plan, and nurses should implement this here in Canada as well, especially because connections are everything. Lastly, and also something RNAO advocates for, is partaking in research, which is very crucial in order to know how to make any change, especially in the topic of international nurse migration. For example, immigrant nurses face way more discrimination as compared to non-immigrant nurses. So if nurses are aware of this, they'll be better able to stop discrimination. Thank you so much for joining us on this presentation.